Hello everybody, welcome to Fireside Chats. This is the second part dealing with our series as far as how to study the Bible. There's a lot of subjects that we're actually going to touch pertaining to how to study the Bible. One being interpretation, another one being relevancy, when the Bible is speaking literal, when it's speaking metaphorical, when it's speaking prophetically, as we often see. But today, in particularly, we're going to start today where do I start? That's the biggest question that we usually deal with when you're dealing with a converted believer, or sometimes even an older believer that is starting to get more into wanting to read their Bible, but just because you have 66 books and so many chapters within some of the books, people are often intimidated by it and not sure where to start at. So from a personal perspective, my suggestion is always to start in a gospel, specifically John. Now, for somebody who's not really a huge reader, not just the idea of the Bible, but just doesn't read a lot with books at all, you could start in Mark because it's the shorter gospel. It gets straight to the crux of stuff. But John, because Christ does a lot of explaining of who he is, what he came to do on a more personal level when dealing with the book of John. And from that point, after you get into a gospel, or if you can read through all four of them, I would suggest that before you dive headfirst into the New Testament, that you go and you start reading the Old Testament starting at Genesis. And particularly because there's a scenario dealing with the New Testament, or there's a theme dealing with the New Testament. There's a lot of things within the New Testament that we must understand because we don't know what the Old Testament points to pertaining to that particular principle. So oftentimes as believers, we end up misunderstanding or misappropriating something that the New Testament is saying because we don't understand where it originated from inside of the Old Testament. For instance, when Paul went and he was speaking to the Bereans, the scriptures that they went to go and search that Paul was talking about is actually what's known as, or what we know as, the Old Testament, because at the time the New Testament is literally being written. So in order to verify what Paul was saying in the New Testament church, they had to go look at the Old Testament in order to verify it. Another example is dealing with Peter on the day of Pentecost. He's talking about Christ, but he's using all these different things from out of the Old Testament to give clarity to the things that he's talking about with Christ. Now, to give one more example of the importance of, yes, first read the Gospels, particularly John. If you're not a strong reader starting out, you can start with Mark, and then, yes, go into Genesis. Here's another reason in particular that I say this from the misunderstanding that we often have as believers. The older believers had this idea pertaining to head coverings. When we read about head coverings inside Corinthians, we oftentimes associate it with when a woman comes in the building to come have fellowship with the other believers that she needed to have a hat on. And that if she didn't have a hat on, that she was dishonoring her head. Well, the actual parallel to that, to better understand what Paul is actually alluding to in Corinthians, shows up in Numbers within the Old Testament. And the actual significance of that was that when a woman was getting her head covered removed, it was because she was being brought before the priest for adultery, for cheating on her husband. So it was an act of defilement. Whenever her head covering was removed, it was looked at as she was defiled. So the idea of dealing with that principle that he's talking about in Corinthians is if a woman is doing a particular thing, this is what that is like. This is like her being defiled, which that act was pertaining to in the Old Testament when a woman's head covering was removed. This is the importance of why I said, okay, we want to start with the Gospels. But after we get to the Gospels, We don't want to just run head first into the New Testament all in of itself. We want to go into the Old Testament to better understand the things that are being used out of the Old Testament to bring clarity to the New Testament.
So then another topic within the interpretation of Scripture, I think that kind of goes into how do we understand, or how can we better understand when the Bible is speaking literally about something, and better understanding when the Bible is speaking metaphorically or symbolically towards something.
Those are two different questions. From a literal standpoint, you should not tempt God. So if you're about to do something literally that is going to tempt God, don't do that, because that's going to tempt God. The devil told Christ to throw himself off the pinnacle of the temple because the Bible said that he would give his angels charge over him to catch him before he dashed his foot against a stone. Christ said, no. The Bible also says, don't tempt God. So if you're catching something literal from the Bible that is about to bring physical harm to your body and for the sake of trying to show how powerful God is, don't do that. That's tempting God. Do not bring physical harm to your body for the sake of trying to display the power of God. He doesn't need you to do that.
That's very good, and I like that example as well. So, also in regards to what is a better way to understand, or what is a way to understand Scripture's relevance to our lives today? You know, because one of from conversations that I've had with other believers and in person or online, a lot of people's mindset is that there are certain scriptures that are that apply to that day and age, that was for a specific group of people during that time. How do we understand when scripture still does apply to us?
That comes through study. That's your responsibility. If you want to understand how to transfer something over from that time into this time, that comes through diligent study. You can't read a couple verses and say, hey, because today we don't betroth woman, we can't be betrothed a woman, that's no longer relevant. Because the way that we're doing it today may be wrong, and the way that they're doing it may be right. So that's going to have to come through your own personal study and coming to that understanding.
I wanted to jump back on something when you said about literally and metaphorically. So you gave the example about literally. So as an example, as a metaphor, in John chapter 15, Christ says that I am the true vine and my Father is the husband. Is that metaphorically or is it literally? I just wanted to point out an example.
Okay, well, Christ is a human being, so you can't be speaking him literally being the vine because he's a walking, talking human being. In that case, you're talking metaphorically.
Right.
Now, here's the thing I want to touch with the metaphorical thing where we get into trouble at. We put metaphors or prophetic implications on things that don't mean those things. Mm-hmm. What you're talking about with the case dealing with Christ, that's something that's clearly seen that's a metaphor most of the times. But there's other areas in the word where we try to squeeze this concept out of it that is not there. The most important thing to do when you're reading is to know exactly what's being said. the better understanding, meaning what we call revelation or the prophetic implication that the lamb actually means this and the bow actually means that, that comes through diligently just knowing exactly what the scripture says. Better understanding or revelation can only be given by the Father. You can't squeeze revelation out of the Word. And the Father reveals something on a better depth once you just know exactly what the Word says. Then you're ready to receive revelation, because revelation is based on correct knowledge of what the Word says. Revelation is never outside of context. If you've taken something out of its context, then you won't get the revelation. For instance, we was talking. The book of Revelation says an angel came down from out of the sky. 1 foot was on the water, 1 foot was on the earth. Instantly, our mindset goes in, see, that angel's got to be so-and-so, because that's the only way. That's where you get into trouble at with misunderstanding things that aren't really revelation. No, it literally says an angel came down, 1 foot on the earth, 1 foot on the water. I know that that's what it says. Okay, let me keep moving on. The better understanding for that will come as you continue to read your word. You don't want to squeeze what we know as revelation or trying to make things say something that it's not saying. You don't want to do that. You just want to know exactly what it says. From out of that, I can promise anybody who does this, God will begin to reveal in a better way what is actually happening.
Right. So the actual reason I actually pulled that scripture, because people would just, as a beginner or even start to read the Bible, and it says that I am the true vine, and yet my Father is the husbandman. Right. So with that word, when we talked about, when you explained on the last video, it's about that if you see a word that you don't understand, it's best to define it in the concordance so you can get some clarity of context of what's being understood. Because if a person say husbandman, they try to relate husband and man, and they say, well, my father's husbandman, and then they could just by naturally just trying to use context clues like they taught us in school to try to define a word, then that could give some type of implication like there's some type of homosexuality there, right? So that's why I wanted to actually point that out as far as with either the actual clarity of it, that to understand that actual word husbandman. So since I put my Strong's Concordance up, that's on my phone. I think I should use right. That it says that the husbandman means a farmer, a cultivator, or a tiller of the ground, one who labors in tillage. In America, where men generally own land on which they labor, the proprietor of a farm also laborer or husbandman, but the word includes the lessee and the owner. So if you was read that scripture again and say, hey, Christ is the true vine, right? And his Father is the husbandman, he's the cultivator, he's the tiller. Now that has bring more context and more clarity to that scripture, and it's been used metaphorically, right? So that's what I just wanted to point out as an example to how we can sometimes get things twisted just by going off of words. And that's why, like I said, as far as how to study the Bible, using context, who, what, when, where, why, and definitions are very important.
Because the phone, you can get a concordance for free, where if you were to go in the store, go on Amazon, which is not a problem, it might cost you a little bit more dollars, but starting out, it's right there on the phone, on your Play Store, on your Apple Store. You hit it, it's for free, and then you can actually do word studies, which will bring way better clarity to metaphors, way better clarity to parables, way better clarity to what Christ might be comparing somebody to, or what somebody else who's a writer of the Bible might be comparing something to. So We thank you once again. This is part 2 of our series of how to study the Bible. Look forward. There's a couple more that are going to come out. And we ask most of all that you would like, subscribe, and comment below. Have a blessed day.